Welcome to Evergreen Cemetery. Yes, I'm here in Santa Cruz. This is your heritage. Today we were going to talk about the ghosts of our past. And what that means is right here in the heart of Santa Cruz City, the ancestors to the church, to the fellowship that you attend today found their final resting place. Many of these people here were founders of the city. How do we know that? Church records. Without church records, we could never have found this out. Because you see, Unitarians at the time of the 1840s through the 1870s weren't considered a real religion. They were the prophetic, progressive liberals of their day. There are a lot of famous Unitarians because at the core of their values was social justice. Sound familiar? You bet. Let's go meet some of them. See that name behind me? You've seen it on a street sign. He arrived here, William Blackburn, in 1848. He was a Unitarian. And when he made his fortune, which a lot of people came because of gold, because they wanted to reinvent themselves, he wrote a letter to his fiancée, Harriet, and she brought her sister, and they came out, and they changed the landscape, literally. Something very interesting happened. You see, Harriet was a woman in her own. She and her sister modeled themselves after Margaret Fuller and were inspired as the decades turned into the 1860s by Clara Barton. They began the church by simple meetings at the Temperance Hall. They offered food, song, dancing, and a lecture. If you can imagine, the only other church in town was staunch Methodists. They looked pretty wild, and their attendance was through the roof. Literally. Blackburn was a very interesting man, but he died young, and he left Harriet most of his fortune. And I'm sorry about the sound there, but there are a lot of wonderful volunteers that work really hard at keeping this place intact. Evergreen is ground zero for Santa Cruz history. What we just didn't understand was how many Unitarians were part of that history. You see, Richard Kirby, who signed the deed to Evergreen, he paired up with a guy named Francis Kittredge, who just happened to be a doctor. And you know, a cemetery is needed when people are dying of cholera, when they're dying of smallpox, when they're dying of disease. They also were a mixed population. And one of the things we learned about being out here was why was this Euro cemetery so diverse? Well, I think we have this man to thank. He and William Blackburn were roommates early on. And of course, when Harriet came out, as a woman, she couldn't travel by herself in those days, so she brought her sister. Well, who do you think the sister married? Well, this is just two here, but their plots are full. The most interesting person in this particular place isn't buried here, but he was the president of the board of trustees that founded the city of Santa Cruz. He lost a young daughter to scarlet fever. I know you can't see that very well, but her name was Katie Root, and his name was Orville Root. These are just a few. And I could tell you a lot of stories, but then I'd be over my time. And, well, if you want to learn more about this place, visit it. And there are plenty of things to read about it. People have published numerous books about the history of this place. What we didn't understand was how important it was to the formation of the way things are done today. You see, Harriet Blackburn, when her husband William died suddenly, she was left with a farm to manage. She didn't know what to do, so she hired migrant labor, the Chinese migrant labor. Let me show you something. This is one of the few Chinese cemeteries still honored in that way. Harriet Blackburn hired migrant Chinese to pick her apples. The problem was they were being harassed. Guys with pillowcases over their heads on horses. She decided to build them housing so that they could live on the property in safety, have gardens. It later became known as Blackburn's Chinatown. And if you read the book Chinese Gold by Sandy Leiden, you can find out all about their role in the building of Santa Cruz's history. Harriet knew the true value of inherent worth and dignity and the true impact of income inequity. We later found out that Harriet's housemates were people who were also trying to define themselves and flee from the situation back east, that from not being accepted, from an abusive marriage, all of these things. Sounds like the Unitarians really knew their stuff. And these are your people. These are my people. Maybe that's why I became a Unitarian minister. When I came here in 2011, I worked to restore some of these. I came here feeling lost. I was recovering from an illness. I got my strength back. I got my hope back. And I finally understood that when you care for something deep enough, change can happen. These people here, these Unitarians, created Evergreen Cemetery. Richard C. Kirby had a tannery here. He was the third guy in this trio of unis who decided that there needed to be a place where people could be buried regardless of income or status. They planned for this. And behind me, for those of you who are truly local, you know which grave this is. London Nelson, or as it was mispronounced and misspelled, Loudon Nelson. He's not alone here, by the way, and unfortunately the stairwell put in 2012. This is a mass grave for African Americans, according to historian Phil Reeder. We don't have any confirmation of that, but it isn't surprising. We know that that happened a lot around here. A lot of things were lost. I myself personally have recovered about 15 headstones. But what we're seeing here is a diversity that can only come from the beloved community. I know this because when I studied the history, when the Unitarian Church closed downtown in 1877, things got bad fast. And Latino violence happened. 3 men were lynched at the Water Street Bridge. Look it up. They were in the shadows at that point. After their church burned down, they were targeted. But I'm asking you now today to take pride in the fact that these people had a lot of courage, not only to come out and build something out of nothing, but to stand up for what they believed in. Inherent worth and dignity, the right to democratic process. You're still here after 150 years. Let's try for another 150 years. And today, 4 more have been added to our congregation, and we will welcome them like our ancestors welcomed me to come fulfill the call and work for those who can't speak for themselves. Thank you, and blessed be.